Hey everybody, today we are checking out this amp, the Harmony H305C. Now this is a vintage tube amp that was built in the early 1960s, and for all intents and purposes, it is very close, both in terms of the schematic and the overall sound, to a Fender Tweed Deluxe. Now I actually happen to be lucky enough to have an original Fender Tweed Deluxe right back here behind me, and I would say that the biggest difference between the two, besides the aesthetic, is the price tag. You can Google right now what it would cost to get your hands on an original Fender Tweed Deluxe, and I know that there's conversations to be had about collectability and whatnot, but as of the making of this video in January 2023, you can find one of these Harmony amps on Reverb or maybe in a local guitar store if you're lucky enough for anywhere between $300 and $400. I spent close to $300 on this thing, which I consider to be a steal when you really start thinking about what's underneath the hood. However, instead of me continuing to just talk about this amp, let's go ahead and listen to it. I'm going to play it for you clean with a little bit of reverb, and then we're going to come back, we're going to talk about the history of the amp, and we're going to talk about what's inside of it and some of the features, and then we're going to play it some more. Just like the rest of my videos on this channel, or most of them anyway, if you go down to the timestamps, you can definitely skip around and listen to whatever you want to listen to, but I would encourage you to kind of listen to the entirety of this video just because this amp is so cool. Alright, here we go. Okay, so I hope listening to that maybe gave your ears a little bit of a baseline to better understand this amplifier. So now let's talk about the history of Harmony as a company, and as a result, the history of this amplifier. So Harmony as a company was founded in 1892 in Chicago, Illinois, for the purpose of manufacturing stringed instruments such as guitars and ukuleles. And that type of manufacturing continued in the Chicago facility up until Harmony was acquired by the Sears Roebuck Company. Now, after the acquisition, manufacturing continued in Chicago, largely under the Harmony brand still, but the Sears Roebuck Company did introduce their own stable of stringed instrument brands into the Chicago factory to be made there as well. This would be stuff like the Silvertone brand. A lot of the Silvertone guitars that were made after the 1930s and up until the late 1960s were made in the Harmony factory. Now I say up until the late 1960s because that's when Harmony eventually closed their doors and stopped manufacturing stringed instruments. Now you'll notice in that very brief history that I just gave you of Harmony as a company, I kept using the phrase stringed instruments. This obviously is not a stringed instrument, so why does it have Harmony, the brand on it? Well, in the same way that Harmony built stringed instruments in their factory and put the Sears Roebuck brands on them like Silvertone, Harmony also contracted with electronics companies to build amplifiers to put the Harmony brand on, also to be sold in the Sears Roebuck stores and in the catalogs. One of those companies happened to also be in Chicago, Illinois, and was called the Sound Projects Company. Now, I wasn't terribly familiar with that brand, but I was familiar with their proprietary label that they put on a lot of things, which was Electrolab amplifiers. I also didn't know a ton about Electrolab, but I had at least seen them around before, heard their name, maybe played one or two of them in the past, so I was at least somewhat familiar with them. Now, one of the amplifiers that Electrolab made was the R500B. And it's that amplifier that gave the bass line for the Harmony H305C. There were, from what I can tell, 3 different iterations of the Electrolab R500. It was the A, the B, the C. It is the B, from what I can tell, that's closest to the H305C. But if anybody out there has any input on the Electrolab R500 series and their similarity to the H305C amplifier, or the H305A for that matter, I would love a little bit more input. Please leave a comment down below. Now, that whole mouthful, I hope, maybe gave you a little bit of a better understanding of how this amplifier came to be. But now let's listen to the amp again. I'm going to play it for you, this time kind of that edge of breakup sound a little bit more aggressively, so you get a taste of that. Then we'll come back and talk about what's under the hood of this amplifier, you know, tubes, speakers, and all of that stuff. So here we go. Alright, so I acknowledge what I'm about to say is absolutely personal preference, and a lot of you might disagree with me, and that's fine. But in my opinion, with this amp, and really with the Tweed Deluxe circuit in general, some of the best tones that come out of these things are bone stock clean, which you heard in the first example, and that edge of breakup sound that I just played for you. In my opinion, between those two tones, you can accomplish a lot of the classic guitar sounds that have been on so many hits over the years. But don't worry, I am still going to play this amp for you completely overdriven and nasty, and I'm also going to put some pedals in front of it. But first, let's talk about what this amp actually has to offer in terms of the features and specs. And we're going to start up here with the control panel. Now, I might sound like a broken record at this point when I say this, but this is basically a Tweed Deluxe, specifically a 5E3 circuit. So if you're familiar with that, all of this is going to be old hat, but it is arranged a little bit, you know, in a different way. You have 4 input jacks across the bottom here that feed into 2 different channels, each channel with its own control knob, or excuse me, volume knob. And then you have a single tone knob over here. And that's it. That's all you've got in terms of the, you know, controls over this amp. Everything sits inside of a nice little blue chassis here, which I think looks kind of nice. And if you look on the bottom side of the chassis, you can see the tubes. Now this amp has 2 12AX7s, it has 2 6V6s, and it has a single 5Y3 rectifier tube. Now, I do want to mention that this amp does seem to overdrive faster than I think all of the other Tweed Deluxes that I've had an opportunity to play. I have read on the internet, you know, for what it's worth, that a couple of the tolerances inside these chassis are slightly different than the Tweed Deluxe tolerances, which might, you know, contribute to the early overdrive, but I'm just kind of speculating at this point. If anybody knows for a fact why, please comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Now, moving to the speaker, this one came original with a 12-inch Jensen. Now, it's worth mentioning that manufacturing at the time in the early 1960s, especially with amplifiers, a lot of the builders just used the parts that they had on hand. So if they ordered a palette of a specific type of speaker, those are the speakers that went into the amps at the time. So if you find like an H305C, for instance, with a different speaker in it, that doesn't automatically mean that it's not original. It just is going to require a little bit more research on your part. Other than that, let's go ahead and just play the amp some more. I'm going to, like I said, play it for you overdriven at this point, and then I'm going to put some pedals in front of it. All of the things that I'm doing you're going to see described on the screen as I'm going, and again, jump down to the timestamps if you want to skip around. And here we go. All right, I'd like to take this opportunity to make just a couple really quick closing comments. The first one is I would like to explain to you why I chose this amplifier to be the first video or first substantive video in this new series that I'm doing. I chose the Harmony H305C very much on purpose because I think that this amp really embodies what I want this new series to be about. This is a very cool old piece of gear that is going to give you a ton of really great sounds. It's a lot of fun to use, but it hasn't been coveted by the community to the point where it has become this incredibly expensive piece of unobtainium that only collectors can own. These are still very much within the price range of most people out there who are purchasing gear today. And that's really what I want to share with the community through these videos. The only other thing that I want to mention is that I hope it doesn't come across as me holding myself out as some type of, electronics guru or guitar master or anything like that. Quite the opposite. I am just someone who has spent his life playing guitar. I've gotten the opportunity to play with some pretty cool people and play some pretty cool gear. And as a result, I'd like to share my experiences with you guys, and that's really it. If you have a piece of gear that you think I should feature on this channel, please write a comment down below or read the description of this video for the different ways that you can reach out and contact me. Other than that, I just want to say thank you, and until next time.